Welcome to Maestro Classics' new series, What Instrument Should I Play? Today we're going to interview David Enlow, organist, and he's going to tell you a little bit about what it's like to play the organ. Very few people really have any idea of the complexities or how interesting this instrument is, so we thought you would enjoy it. May I introduce David Enlow. So David, how old were you when you began to play the organ?
Well, I was 12 years old, and it's a bit young. Most people start the organ when they're 15 or 16 or just getting interested in college time, but I started when I was 12.
Did you play the piano before that?
I did. I was lucky. I had piano lessons when I was 5. I took a little break in the middle, but then I took more piano lessons through about 8 to 11, and then fell in love with the organ, and there it was.
So where did you hear the organ for the first time?
Well, my grandmother in her house had a couple of small home organs, and I used to like to play with those when I was studying the piano. And the church that my family went to at the time got a new organ about when I was 11 and a half or so.
Yes.
And I thought it was really fascinating. I'd never seen one up close that was more large like the church organ, and so that was the beginning.
So you were smitten.
I was. It's a big machine, you know. It's got all kinds of moving parts, and the piano has one keyboard, and you know, organs can have 2 and 3 and 4, 5, and 6 even. So it's really neat.
Amazing. So, who was your first teacher?
Well, my first teacher was through the Conservatory of Music in the city I grew up in Toronto, and then I got another teacher who was also at the university there, and carried on that way.
So what's the difference between playing the piano? I mean, obviously, there are foot pedals.
That's the big one. Exactly. Organists are almost unique that we make music with our feet. If you play the carillon, there's also a pedal board, and then you'll play the bells in the tower. But the organ has got a pedal board where you play some of the lowest notes in the instrument with your feet. And the pedal keyboard is laid out just the same as the manual keyboard in terms of naturals and sharps, but it's a much bigger size so that you can play accurately with your toes and heels.
Let's take a look at the pedal board. So when you first begin playing the organ, do you start with your feet or do they come afterwards?
Well, the first thing is to find out how the touch for the hands is different from the piano.
Ah,
So the
okay.
piano has hammers that strike the strings, and you're always throwing the hammer with your finger so that it hits the strings in the way you'd like. And on the organ, there's no hammer at all. You're just making a connection mechanically so that the valve at the other end of the mechanism opens the pipe bottom and lets the air in to make it speak.
Okay, so you start with, it's much softer than the piano, right?
Yes.
When you're playing?
And each key is the same weight, and you play only with as much energy as you need to put the key down, even when you're playing forte. For example, if I play a very soft sound, that's that pressure on the key, and if I play some of the loudest sounds, it's the same pressure on the key. You don't play any louder in terms of your force in your hand.
So what's happening when you change?
Well, these are called pistons, and they control the stops, which you can also draw by hand. And each stop on this organ represents a set of pipes. And so for each note of the keyboard on this stop, there is a pipe. There are a total of 61 pipes.
Is each note a different pipe?
It is.
So you have all of these keys times all of these stops. You multiply them together, and that's the number of pipes that we have here?
It's even more than that, because some stops have several pipes per note.
Oh my
and that makes a very rich harmonic sound. But yes, there are thousands of pipes in this organ, and this is not a very big organ. This is a modest church organ, but has several thousand pipes.
So they can have tens of thousands of pipes?
They can.
Amazing. But you don't see all of those pipes. If you look around here, we see some up here, and those are the very attractive, decorative ones. And then there's some at the back, but we still have not seen thousands of pipes. Where are the other pipes?
Well, the organ is very special among instruments because it lives in a room, and we call that the organ chamber. So in this case, the organ is in this chamber here, up in the front, where the choir sits so they can hear it, and then also a large part of the organ in the back where the congregation sits, so it supports the singing out there and makes the very grand organ sound.
Oh, so the sound is coming from both places.
Exactly. That's another thing with the organ. You can have pipes in different locations in the room and move the sound around the room as you like. It's very architectural.
Could you show us?
Sure. So here, pretend that we had two flutes and we wanted to hear a flute call from the front of the room, and another flute will answer from the back of the room. And on the organ, it's as easy as changing keyboards.
You have 3 different keyboards. Why?
Well, this is so that you can combine different sounds at the same time. For example, not only can you play one sound and then another, but I can play an accompanying sound on one manual, say these stops, and I can play a solo sound on a different manual. And using my thumb, I could even have a third sound. If you have 4 keyboards, of course, the possibilities to play on all 4 keyboards at once will tie your mind in knots.
Well, it's really like an orchestra in a couple of big boxes, isn't it?
It really is, and the organ has been compared to the orchestra since the 19th century, when the organ really came into its own mechanically.
We know that Bach was a great organist, perhaps the greatest organist, but part of his job was also repairing the organ. Is that something which organists today still have to do, or are there people who come in and fix these thousands of pipes and issues that they can have?
Well, it's a very good question, because some organists will make little repairs or do some tuning of their instruments. I don't, because I think that's like dentistry. We should leave it to the professionals. And so we have the organ repair people come and they tune up the organ and fix anything that goes wrong with it. Also, sometimes organs are high up in the room and require going up ladders, and it's not always the safest job in the world. So if you're good with ladders, organ repair can be good for you, and if you don't like heights, you should stay on the ground where the keys are.
Could you show us sort of the difference when Bach was playing and what you get in the 19th century when they decide that there should be a very big, different kind of organ sound? Let me get out of your way.
Not at all. So in the time of Bach, the organ had fewer kinds of sounds than it does today, and also none of these controls. These controls are all run by electricity, and of course they didn't exist in Bach's time. Bach had stop knobs very similar to this, but they were directly connected to the mechanism by levers and other mechanical devices. So the first thing coming out of the Middle Ages was that the organ had a bunch of pitches that could be heard for each key. And that's called the plenum, and we play that kind of sound for Bach often because it's a very early organ sound that carries on into the present day for composition, but was especially prevalent in his time. After the mechanical innovations of the 19th century, the organ builders started to develop different kinds of sounds. One in France called Cavaillé-Coll developed something, a flute harmonique, which gets louder as it goes up the compass, and also has a hole cut in the pipe so it makes an extra loud harmonic sound, and you can hear the sort of puff of air through the hole drilled in the pipe.
Okay. Let's hear a big sound from the organ.
The big sound is part of the reason I took up the instrument.
I see.
If you want to make a small sound, you can take up just one violin, but if you like to hear the opening of Saint-Saëns Symphony No. 3, it sounds like this.
If you were a young person and you thought you'd like to begin, you had piano lessons and you thought you'd like to begin playing the organ, what would you do?
Well, I would look to the local conservatory of music and find a teacher directory, or to find a church with a renowned music program, or even a synagogue with a music program with the organ, and to try to find an expert teacher who can guide the proceedings. It's important to be able to reach the pedals. So if I were a young person, I couldn't yet reach the pedals, I would say it's probably a little early.
Yes.
Which is why I say, again, most people start mid-teens with the instrument. But the piano leads very much to the organ, so if you're already studying the piano, carry on with that. And when the time for the organ comes, it'll be very exciting indeed. It's very important to have good instruction at the organ, because it's so complicated an instrument to play and understand, and the learning of it is the work of a lifetime.
Yes. Well, it's always exciting to hear, and I guess the only other question I have is, do organists only play in churches and synagogues?
Well, it's not true. The organ and the church have a relationship that goes back many hundreds of years. But before then, the very first organs were heard in the ancient world, and they accompanied public gatherings in Greece and Rome. And they were very definitely not church gatherings. And then fast forwarding to our own time, one of the great applications of the organ in the 20th century was for the silent films. And if you have ever looked up silent films, you can look on YouTube and find all kinds of them with organ accompaniment, because before, the sound of the voices could be recorded, the organ provided all of the drama and score for the film. So
can you give us a little bit of that sort of?
Well, you might hear, for example, if somebody is tied to railroad tracks, that sort of diminished chord sounds.
Yes.
You can even hear it in cartoons that are made much later on. But that came from the organist accompanying those exciting movies.
Well, I think that anybody who watches a silent film now, or actually hears that sound watching cartoons, will suddenly picture an organ, which is exciting.
It is. The other thing is that organs show up in concert halls today. So if you go to a lot of concert halls where your symphony might play, or your local orchestra, you'll often see the pipes right above the stage. And so many of the orchestral works that every musician gets to know who's playing classical music will involve the organ in some way. A lot of repertoire has organ part in it, from Mahler to the Baroque.
Great. Well, thank you very much for taking some time to be with us this morning. It's wonderful to hear. And for those of you who haven't realized it, David Enlow is the soloist on Bach and the Organ, one of the Maestro Classics recordings. So I hope that you will continue to play with us and for us, and thank you for being with us today.
It's a great pleasure. Thanks for coming to see the organ.